Okay.
David, are you happy for us to kick off?
Yes, I am, and we are recording.
Great. Over to you, Hilton.
Thanks. So hi everybody, and welcome to this webinar about the science of performance. I think there's something interesting to learn here today, so I'm going to ask you to, really try and have an open mind. And this is a fairly new topic for me, so I'm definitely not an expert in this, but it is something that I've been reading a lot about lately. And it definitely speaks to me in certainly in the role that I am at Omnicor as a coach and just in life in general. So I'm going to start off by showing you a video, and I hope all the technology works over here. And I hope that you can hear the audio. So the first video you're going to see is of Mondo Duplantis. He is the current world record holder in the pole vault, and we're going to watch him break the record that he did earlier this year. And
on top of the world, first time in China. It's a day he'll never forget. 6:23, of course, last year he extended his own world record, and he's added another centimetre. Mondo
oh, sorry. So that was Mondo Duplantis, and I can't see the chat, but I'm very happy for people to either use the audio or the chat. And Colleen, if you could just share with me to answer the question that I have on the screen. What separates someone like Mondo Duplantis, who is the best in the world at the pole vault, versus other people who aren't? What did he do differently? And I'd be interested to hear from people, or for Colleen, you could tell me what people are saying.
Yeah, happy to post it in the chat, guys. I think the mics are muted at the moment. Keegan says dedication and discipline, which he has so much of. Practice, self-belief and training, raw capacity and tons of practice. That's
tons of practice.
Tons of practice, but there's also a bit about you've got to have the capacity.
You've got to have the capacity. Okay.
Yes.
I'm not sure exactly what that means, but definitely, if you think of how technical the pole vault is and the kind of 50 things you have to have in your head from the moment you take off till the moment you get over that bar at the top, there's so much going on that your brain has to have in some way internalize those rules and the pathways in order to do that effectively. So we're going to watch another video now. And this video is, I don't know if anyone recognizes that person, but her name is Wuja Yang. And Wuja Yang, very, very popular on the on the piano circuit, classical music, piano. And we're going to drop in to the middle of a performance where she is busy with Prokofiev's Toccata, which she did as an encore to a concerto she had already done. And I want you to kind of think of the same things. How did Wuja Yang get to be this good? And what's going on in her head as she goes through this performance? So here we go. I've watched this 1,000 times. I mean, I know we could watch that for longer. It is an incredible performance. But again, I asked the same question. I'd be interested in what were your thoughts while you were what were your ideas while you were watching it around Wu Zhiyang. How did she get to this point in life? And by the way, there are videos on YouTube of Wu Zhiyang, age 8, playing amazing concerts, and you can almost watch her at every age. She's now 36.
Okay, so sorry, Elaine was saying she didn't hear the sound. Sorry, Elaine, there was sound. We've got dedication and willpower, choice, passion coming up, innate ability, perseverance, motivation, available means and exposure. From Candace, focus, passion, but above all, practice.
Yeah. And what is the, if you think of the practice thing, which is absolutely true. I mean, no one would deny that. But something happens to your brain when you practice so much. Something happens to the neural pathways. Wu Zhiyang, I mean, she's gone through if you look at the music score and the thousands of notes that are there, she's not even thinking about that. Her body and her, the whole integration of her body and mind just work to play absolutely flawlessly the hundreds and thousands of notes that are there, without even thinking about it. So that's Wu Zhiyang, and again, something very useful. So does anybody, I'd be so curious if anyone in the audience perhaps knows who these 3 girls are. 3 ladies, sorry.
Thank you.
Anyone know who they are?
No one's posting in the chat?
Yeah?
No one is posting in the chat, so we assume we're all interested to know.
Okay, so these are the Polgar sisters. So the Polgar sisters were born in Hungary. Their father, Laszlo Polgar, was a chess player and an educational psychologist. And he raised his children as an experiment. So I don't advocate that anybody as a parent does this, but this is what Laszlo did. And he kind of had the view that you can mold your children into any shape given them the right environment. And what he did was from the earliest of age, from age 3 and 4, they played chess every single day. He homeschooled these children. He obviously had the support of his wife, and he homeschooled these children. And these 3 Polgar daughters all became grandmasters in chess. In the 1998 Olympiad in Thessalonica in Greece, the Russians, up until that time, since 1953, had completely dominated the world of women's chess. And these 3 girls, there was Judith and Sophia and Susan. Susan was 19, Judith was 12, Sophia was 14. They went as the Hungarian team, and they beat the Russians for the first time in history since 1953. Laszlo Polgar had kind of indicated that you could shape your children in some kind of way if you did. He turned his house into a shrine for chess. The pictures on the walls were about chess. The stuff that they talked about all day was chess, and they all became grandmasters. Judith Polgar is considered one of the greatest women chess players of all time, and she was the only woman to get into the top 10, including the men. In other words, there's like a men's ranking and a women's ranking. In world chess, she was number 8. Only time a woman had been in that list. So you may know this other person over there. Everyone will. Tiger Woods. That's Tiger Woods, age 2, on TV, playing golf. His father also dedicated his life to turning Tiger into a a golf prodigy, and into, whatever. I mean, we all know how good Tiger Woods was. He was better than almost anyone else. He was a legend, absolutely. Not so much in his life and the way he ran it, but definitely in golf. He was an amazing golfer. And both of these, families it's obviously not science to say that, because of these 2 anecdotal things that, you can turn your children into anything. Was there some convergence of talent and just, dedication that did it? Or did the dedication alone turn them into the people who they were? So what's the takeaway? over here, I mean, it's fairly obvious, you know, excellence, becoming good at something requires lots and lots of hard work. Now, it's obvious to everyone. In fact, a lot of the stuff that we're going to be talking about here today is just going to be obvious to everybody, but you're not going to become an elite performer in anything unless you do the hard work. So this over here is K. Anders Ericsson, and K. Anders Ericsson has done the key scientific work in analyzing peak performance and trying to understand how peak performance works. And I could say that he is like a radical believer in the fact that the dedication is way more important than the talent. So he did an interesting experiment. He had a grad student named, a grad student, the guy just happened to be hanging around in the department, Steve Falloon. And this was early days under Ericsson. And what he wanted to do was to see how he could stretch Steve Falloon's capacity in digit memorization, right? So in other words, the way that works is you kind of say a few numbers and the person repeats them back. So, you know, an example would be, I would say 5, 6, 8, 9. You would be listening, you would memorize that, and you would say the digits back, right? And what Anders Ericsson was interested in is, could he make Steve better than average at doing this kind of thing? So they met every day for a few days, about 10 days, and they met for an hour, and he would do the digit memorization with Steve. And like most people, more or less the kind of threshold of most people is to remember like 7 digits. That's, you know, we all learn that in first year psychology. But something clicked after about the first week and a half, and Steve got a little bit better at doing it. And what Anders Ericsson's method was that, like, if he said 7 digits and Steve got it wrong, he would then go back to 5 and do 5 a few times, then up to 6, up to 7. So in other words, he would take him to the boundary of his capacity and try to push him over that. If that didn't work, he would go back a little bit and then push him forward. So interestingly, what happened is somewhere around the 2nd or 3rd week, Steve worked out his own brain mechanism using chunking. In other words, not hearing the numbers individually, but grouping the numbers together. And at the 60th session, he got up to about 20 digits, right? A leap further than what most people can do without practice. So here was Anders Ericsson saying, you know, you can stretch people's capacity with the right kind of practicing. And in fact, by the 100th session, Steve was doing 40 digits. By the 200th session, he was doing 80 digits. And that was absolutely world class. And here was this guy, he was just a normal dude, and with the right kind of practicing and learning how to use other techniques like mnemonics, you know, the people make stories with the numbers, he could finally stretch it to, you know, whatever, 80 digits. Actually, if you look over here, you can see that spoken number digit memorization, whatever you can see from the people doing it, mostly from Asians, is now 679 digits. All these people have learned from the masters before them on how to do this digit memorization. People have just got better and better at it. And in 10 years' time, these records will also probably look not as good. You know, there'll be people doing 800, 1,000 digits, who knows, because there are techniques now for doing that, and you can learn those techniques. So Anders Ericsson, who, if you need a hero in the kind of peak performance thing, should be your hero. His most famous article is called The Role of Deliberate Practice in the Acquisition of Expert Performance, cited by 15,000 people, 15,000 other articles. And in this article, he kind of mentions almost casually that it takes about 10,000 hours to, you know, become an expert at something. And everyone knows that Malcolm Gladwell took that idea and wrote his book called Outliers and really popularized it. But that was from this article over here by Anders Ericsson. And there's many, many other articles. There are pages of articles by Anders Ericsson, very prolific. Unfortunately, he died just this year. So, but he made a massive contribution. So let's look at some of his early work from Anders Ericsson over here. He took violin players, right? And you can see lots of interesting statistics on the left-hand side. But what he wanted to know from the violin players was, why were some better than others? And in short, he boiled it down to the amount of time that they practice. In other words, there was a linear correlation. It's not even really a correlation, but there was a direct line between the number of hours that people practice and the effectiveness that they were in terms of winning competitions and doing those kind of things, right? So Anders Ericsson was definitely of the view of the more you practice, the better you're going to be. And he was saying talent is not important, right? So he has that view. Not everyone has that view, but definitely he had that view. Here's the same thing with pianists over here. You can see that the expert pianists and the amount of hours that they were practicing per week compared to amateurs, I mean, you can't even compare it over here. But basically, Anders Ericsson was saying that the earlier you start in life, so you can see this is chronological age, and the more you practice, the better you're going to get. And it wasn't just in music and in piano. These things have been found to cross multiple domains, chess, mathematics, whatever, a whole lot of different things, learning languages. And it's obvious to us. You know, you start something early in life and you practice like mad, you're going to get really good. And he was saying that's the only way to become like an absolute peak achiever in that thing. So what's the second takeaway? People who practice more generally perform better than people who practice less. This linear line between how to become an expert. So let's just take these rules. Yeah.
Can I ask a question
Sure.
in between? Keegan wants to know if he practices something every day, but he doesn't love it. Will he still become exceptional?
So my answer to Keegan is no. But he'll have to wait until I tell him why, and that's coming a little bit later in the presentation. Okay. So let's just take a general thing, right? Learning to drive a car, hitting a golf ball, whatever it is, there are different phases, very predictable phases of learning a skill. So the first thing is, now I've taught 3 children to drive. The first thing is, you say you get in the car on the first day, you're going to drive, everything's unfamiliar, you know, whatever, the clutch, the accelerator, just steering the car, it's very hard. Everything takes, you really have to concentrate hard in the beginning to learn the basic rules of what to do, but you start getting it. So as the days pass and you're practicing a little bit every day, you know, you find that after some time you can kind of get around the block, start and start, where you have to start on a hill, do all the kind of things that you have to remember when you're driving, and the concentration aspect is getting less because your neural pathways are doing their job in internalizing some of the mechanisms that you need to do it. And then after some period, say around 50 hours, you've got to an acceptable standard of performance in terms of driving your car, and you can go, you know, whatever, nervously, but generally get through traffic and be able to drive back and forward. Initially, it's still hard, you're still concentrating. In fact, you know, this is the time when most people make their mistakes in driving. In the early age, that's why insurance is more expensive for new drivers. But eventually, it becomes completely automatic. And anyone here who's been driving for a while, and most of us have, know that we're not even thinking about driving when we're doing it. We're looking out the window, we're on podcasts, there's lots of things going on, and you can drive completely effortlessly. A little bit like the way Wu Zhiyang was playing that piece. It wasn't effortless, but everything it was all in her head, everything that she had to do. And then what happens? It plateaus. You don't keep becoming a better and better driver. In fact, at some point, you start degrading a little bit and become a little bit worse over time. And definitely, we know that like when you're much older, it gets hard to drive. But certainly, unless you're doing something different, you plateau, you've got your level, and that's you are driving. So these steps over here happen with a lot of the skills that we happen in life. So let's just talk about generally what they say is that with longitudinal research, there's been the finding that increases in performance happen gradually. There's not normally big leaps that happen from one time to the next. And the age at which most experts typically reach their performance is like somewhere, depending on what it is, but in sports, it's around the kind of mid-20s. Here's Jakob Ingebrigtsen, who's currently one of the best middle distance runners in the world, practices like mad, trains like mad. But, when he's 35, he's now like 25. When he's 35, he's not going to be as good anymore. This is where he's peaked. Einstein, in the arts and sciences, it's a little bit different. Einstein wrote his special theory of relativity. He published when he was 25-ish, and when he was 35, published the general theory of relativity. And artists mature a little bit later than kind of physical sportsmen. But here the Beatles, in the same breath we're talking about Einstein and Ingebrigtsen, the Beatles practiced. They had their gig at the Cavern in Amsterdam, and they did their 10,000 hours over 2 years. They played gigs every second day. They sometimes had 2 gigs a day. And in that time, all the time that they spent together, they came out of that. They were they were late teenagerhood, early 20s, and they came out of that as absolutely profoundly expert at doing their gig. They were a great band. They did that, and that's from Gladwell's book. So,
Hilton, sorry, can I just bounce in there quickly? If based on what you're saying, if I really don't have any ability, Tanya is asking, someone lacks ability but practices, could this still lead to exceptional performance, or is there some element of, as Matt said, raw ability required?
So again, I think the answer to that question is coming, but the short answer is that I believe, done in the right way, you can enhance your skills for anything, if you go about it in the right way. And I'm going to talk about what that way is, right? So, interestingly, we talk about the performance of experts. So they've done so many interesting research papers. And, in the one, they kind of took therapists who had been practicing for 30 years and they exposed them to a client, and the client had a session with them, and they were rated on how well the session went. And then they would do the same. A younger therapist, say a person who's just been a therapist for a year, would have the same client, and the client would rate both the expert or the more experienced person and the new person. And across multiple domains, I'm talking about therapy over here, it's found that often the less experienced people who have just come out of training are more effective than the kind of so-called experts. So this doesn't always happen, but it has been found across multiple studies. It happens particularly in those professions that are more hidden. So, therapists often work alone. It's, there's not a lot of input from the outside world. And in those kind of professions, they're getting the experience, but they're not really growing in performance. But, as it says over here, developers, coders, even physicists have been found to be unexceptional compared to new people in those fields. And even with wine experts over here. So if you take a bottle of wine and you tear off the label so no one knows where it's from, and there's got to be a blind test with a wine expert and someone who's just a casual wine drinker, they have found that the wine experts, their performance is only slightly better than just general wine drinkers. So, when they don't know where the wine's coming from, whatever, that it evens out. And if you look at different professions, I've got psychiatrists and psychotherapists at the top over there, because as I say, that's more hidden. The more kind of you working in a communal setting, like with an airline pilot, there's co-pilots, there's the navigators, you're flying the airplane, there's simulators, there's a lot of metrics that you can get on your performance. In those cases, the experience that you get generally makes you better. But if you're in a profession that is more hidden, and we're going to talk about some of these a little bit later, generally you kind of hit the plateau and then slowly get worse. So here's another interesting experiment. And if the word over there you can see is auscultatory. So what they did was they took medical doctors and they took recordings of heart murmurs and sounds of sick patients, whatever, some sick, some healthy, and they asked the doctors to diagnose what was going on with the patients, right? And here's what they found. The students, so medical, whatever, graduate medical students who were just new, the performance was the lowest. Then residents was better than them. So these are people who are now more experienced in medicine and they have had more exposure and more training. And then specialists in, whatever, cardiovascular, just better. But look what happens to this curve over here, that with time, the performance of general practitioners went down. And actually, if you draw a line, you can see somewhere in their careers, a little bit later on, they're kind of only at the level of students and then start degrading over time. So this is this idea of experience alone does not always and mostly doesn't translate to improved performance. And in fact, expert performance peaks somewhere after you've learned and then often degrades with time unless you do something about it. So what is the thing about it? And this is, again, all comes from Anders Ericsson's kind of research around it, that a particular kind of practice called deliberate practice can help you enhance and grow in whatever skill you're trying to learn and get better at. So mere repetition, not enough. So how does deliberate practice work? We're going to go through these steps over here. The first thing is you have to select a discrete area of performance to get better at, right? So something is chosen that I want to get better at this thing. So let's say, just for example, that I'm playing tennis and I want to improve my backhand. So what I need to do is to get a tennis coach, and the tennis coach watches me hit the ball and gives me another 100 shots on my backhand and tweaks my performance as I'm going along and says, no, move your body like this, follow through properly. And you're getting immediate feedback from someone who's better than you on how you have to improve your performance. You practice with your coach to do it. And then also what you have to do is just on your own, keep practicing the technique. So there's time spent with the coach, time spent afterwards, where you keep going through it, you're on the court alone, and you're doing it over there. And these efforts, this deliberate practice over here, will take your performance. What you want to do is always be at the edge. They call it the proximal zone of expertise or something. You always want to be at the edge of where you're just comfortable doing it and push it a little bit further, right? So a little bit beyond your current level, that's where your coach is pushing you until you can do it at that level and you're comfortable. The thing is over here, your development will be arrested if you stop doing this, right? So you'll get to a level and you'll stop. If you keep doing it on your own without getting the feedback, you're probably just going to plateau at that kind of level. And also what's going on while you're doing that, while you're getting the kind of 200 backhand shots that you're really refining your technique, your brain is building the neural pathways that it has to, that will facilitate the kind of learning that it has to. So you're automating the kind of things that are going on. And, then you will, once you've mastered that, you will find the next thing, and you take those discrete areas of improvement and you keep working at them until you've sorted them out, and then you kind of find the next thing and you do that. So that's how expert deliberate practice improves performance. You need to be first of all, outside of your comfort zone. So here's another quick summary of it, because it's so important. I've done it twice, right? So you find a specific goal. You give it your full concentration, your coach is over there, you get the feedback, and you keep adapting your performance until you have mastered that's what you're doing. It's important that it's at the zone of where you're not comfortable. So you're learning something new over here, and you've got to get those neural pathways to kind of integrate the stuff. It's a repeatable thing that you can do again and again on your own. You eliminate the mistakes, and that's the way deliberate practice works. Now, this is a very, I mean, it sounds so obvious that, here we're giving a webinar on something that, really what I'm saying to you is if you want to get good at something, go practice, find a coach, and you'll get good. But that is actually the way we learn any skill. My son recently started taking surfing lessons, and this is exactly the way it was done. Got in the water with the coach, and took the waves, and tweaked little bits here and there until he could do it better and better each time. But actually, this applies in more areas in life than just tennis and chess and whatever it is. But the takeaway over here is that there's a specific mode of practice that is required to enhance performance. I think that answers one of the questions, Colleen, that came up earlier. Yes, you can get better at stuff, but you've got to do it in a specific way. So here's an applied example. And I especially took this example because it doesn't involve anything like, it's something more in our world. So this was around negotiation skills and learning sales technique. And the Practice Labs is an organization that teaches people how to do sales better. So one of the things that they do, it's called word practice. And what they do in word practice is they've got like a list of, the 20 most common ways that people turn you down for a sale. So here is one of the examples. The client says, oh, it's something we'll look at next year. And the like standard responses to those things, is okay, thanks, we'll phone you in a year or whatever it is. Or you could be more aggressive and say, well, that's not a good idea. But in the Practice Labs, they will teach you a whole lot of better responses to that specific scenario. Here's one of them. That makes sense. If there's something specific holding you back from acting right now. In other words, just, keeping the conversation, keeping the person engaged and trying to really understand why they might want to put it off. And they've got a whole bunch of these. So in basic sales, that's the first thing they do. They know for sure what are the ways that we get stuck, and here are better responses to those things, and they drill them into your head until you can do them automatically, right? The neural pathways, things happens again. They obviously don't stop there. The things get more and more complicated, and I'm not going to go through them with you in detail, but really just to say over here that you would go through role plays with people, and you have to then to think on your feet. And again, there's a feedback coach who's saying you could have done that better. Let's try it again. Let's see how it goes. They make it more complicated and throw in curveballs and all the kind of things that you would expect until you're much more fluent at it. So this is something, if you think of negotiation skills, useful for anybody to kind of learn that. They also do, simulated practice where you can get recordings. And, the recording will show a setup conversation with someone trying to do a sale, and then you stop the recording at some point and give your response, and then you watch what's the best response and a bad response. So all these kind of things use really just to teach you through deliberate practice how to get better and better at these kind of things. So if you think about it, I want to go just down here for a little bit longer. What's happening in a sales conversation? It's really a conversation. It's a specific kind of conversation. But the invitation over here is that deliberate practice can also be used in our lives when we're just having other conversations with people. So, if you think about the situation of, say, a typical manager who now has to have a conversation, maybe it's a tough conversation. Normally, we would just go and wing it. But in this way, you could practice how to do it so that you get better and better, and you can advance your skills in doing, almost any kind of conversation with the right kind of practice. So one of the key domains of deliberate practice has been in psychotherapy. And I think it's been in that because of all the kind of professions in the world, psychotherapy is very hidden, what kind of happens. And if you take someone who's been practicing therapy for 30 years, they generally think that they're pretty good at it, and probably think that they've been getting better and better at it as time goes on, because they've got more experience, they've had more exposure, and whatever it is in their heads, it feels good. But actually, very few therapists have metrics that kind of say, well, actually, what are the outcomes? And, let's analyze them and see if you're really as good as you think you are. So these two sheets that you're seeing in front of you over here come from another, I think a very profoundly excellent practitioner of deliberate practice. His name's Scott D. Miller. He's written amazing books on psychotherapy, but they apply deliberate practice techniques in their extended practice. So, they have lots of therapists working for them and they get metrics. So the one metric over here is the outcome rating scale. So that at the start of any session, they first say, their client comes in and the client has to fill in this thing. You can see it's just a few things. And what they're doing is measuring how the person has been in the week since the last session. How are you doing individually, interpersonally, socially, overall, whatever. They're keeping metrics. Now, you imagine if you're doing this over, 10 sessions, you're starting to get data that tells you how the person is progressing in life and whether the therapy you're doing is actually working. And if you're doing that with, many individuals, you start getting really useful data about it, that you can start understanding where you're effective and where you're less effective. So getting data is absolutely crucial around this. And then here's another form that they do, which is at the end of the session. And at the end of the session, it's just like, how was the session? Talk about it in terms of our relationship, the goals, and those kind of things. And again, getting very useful metrics just on how the client found that session. So Scott, on a podcast that I was listening to, Scott Miller gives a very interesting example where one of their practitioners were examining their outcomes, and they were seeing that some of the outcomes of my psychotherapy are not very good. So they did the analysis and they saw, well, it's actually they're better when they're with women than with men. With men, your stats are more off than they are with women. So something in what you're doing with men isn't working quite as well. So then they did more analysis and they said, well, if you look at the cases where I wasn't doing well, it was particularly the kind of alpha males that I was struggling with. And then when they looked deeper, they said it's in a situation where the alpha males are demanding advice from you. In those kind of situations, you're not really feeling equipped on how to handle that situation, and they're giving the session ratings are much poorer than they were for other types of clients or whatever's going on. And that way he could drill down to a specific example of something where deliberate practice could be used just to refine that specific area of their practice. And this is a very good example. Obviously you can use that just as an analogy. As a leader, you could find the areas where you have a development area and just focus on that. So it's very important. So a takeaway is we need to we first need to get data before you decide on where you have to improve. And data can just be, I'm going to ask 5 people around me, what they think of my skill in this area. And then, so it doesn't, it's obviously better to get obviously more scientific stuff, but, one way or another, you need data. So what are the implications for this? So I know that some of the people in the audience, I don't know who's in the audience, but I think that some of the people in the audience are people involved in coaching. And the one thing that you can do is to become a better coach, you need good statistics, definitely good data on the outcome measures of your performance. And that gives you, if you're not doing, in my view, if you're not doing a deliberate practice intervention to actually build on your areas of development, you're probably plateaued or getting, maybe whatever. It's the whole thing that we're saying, experience is not enough. And, we all know that there's, there's coaching communities where people get together and you talk about coaching, but passive discussion is not a substitute for active skills growth, right? You have to do the deliberate practice in order to get better. Just talking about it definitely is useful on some level, but it's not enough to enhance your skills, definitely according to this model. But then also, the people we're coaching can benefit from deliberate practice in many ways. If they're struggling with tough conversations, There should be tough conversations going on between you and them where you can help them, again, take them to the edge of the performance, give them a set of robust alternatives that they can use. They practice that with you. They try it in the real world. They bring it back. They video, all the kind of things that you would need. And I've given a few places, kind of examples where that could be used. So, you know, influencing, listening, all those kind of things definitely would be useful. And the area that I think this is most underutilized is just in leadership development. So now, you know, you can forget about like maybe formal coaching where some development is at least taking place. But most leaders in the corporate world, to my mind, are not self-aware or reflective enough of how good they are at doing their jobs. And we know the trap that, you know, most people think, well, I've been doing this for long, I'm getting better and better at it. And we're saying that the evidence isn't like that. You don't get better just by getting older and by getting more experience. You get better by pushing the boundaries of your effectiveness in very discrete entities. So, you know, for me, this is an area in the corporate world where, you know, that leaders should be saying, I need to get metrics. Now, one of the ways you can get metrics is from a 360, but it doesn't have to be that. You can just ask people, you can have focus groups, you can get the information on where you need to get better, and then you need to go and practice those things as deliberately as if you were practicing your backhand in tennis. You need to have someone says, you know, this is an area where you're struggling, and let's go through the better ways of doing it, and you build the neural pathways and the heuristics for doing that better. And I think that this is very undeveloped in the world and is an area, and I think that deliberate practice is going to become just more and more important in our world because the principles are really just sound. And I think then just, you know, for any kind of training, you know, the kind of training where you just go and listen to someone speak and it's talk and chalk and the lecturing is just less effective than the kind of training where you can go and actually develop the kind of concrete skills. And, you know, I just think for like managers, you know, if you take like Omnicor's example, you know, something that we do commonly is say we give feedback to clients on assessments. And, you know, what you want to do is, like if people are just doing that on their own, they're going to think that they find it. But you want to watch people do it and you want to help them grow and give them, you know, so someone a little bit more advanced than them watches them do it and they learn the skills of how to do that better. And that can be for anything. It could be for writing reports. It could be doing for admin, for Excel, you know, you name it. Deliberate practice has got a way of doing it. So I'm going to show you another video now. It's going to run for probably a minute and a half. And it is, unfortunately, a therapy example again. And it's someone learning kind of reflecting skills and just how to use reflecting skills. It's there. You'll see three people in the video. On the top left-hand corner, there's a man, and he's the kind of expert trainer. And then you've got someone at the bottom who is pretending to be a client, and you've got the person in the top right-hand corner who is learning the skill. So
the last few days have felt different. Like that mental fog in my head is finally lifted and I can start making some changes.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like the past couple of days have felt better to you, that you've kind of noticed a shift in your mood. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, take a breath. How was that for you?
A little choppy. Yeah, I think I could do that one again.
Great. So it seems like you were definitely getting at the core meaning there, right? It sounds like you might want to practice a bit more for verbal fluency. Does that feel good? All right, so let's do it again. Jamie, could you repeat that one?
Sure. The last few days have felt different. Like that mental fog in my head is finally lifted and I can start making some changes.
It sounds like you've really noticed a shift in the past couple days. And I wonder if you are feeling kind of positive about that shift.
Great. So you ended up with a question, that's fine, right? Maybe a bit beyond the reflection, but let's count.
Okay, so the reason I showed you that was, just to give you a tiny little sample of kind of the way that it could work in the real world. It wouldn't have to be a therapeutic setting, really, as I'm saying. It could be any kind of conversation or any kind of skill that is important. And this video actually goes on for about 10 minutes, and you see the person who's being trained just get like more effective and intonation, just like small micro skills get better all the time, and they're internalizing that stuff and just becoming a better reflective listener through it. So deliberate practice, which, when Anders Ericsson in the late 1990s just started doing his research, was, completely, everyone knew that if you went to a coach in sport, whatever, they didn't call it that, it was called coaching or training. And, now this has become much more mainstream. So there's actually an Institute for Deliberate Practice, which you can see over here on the screen. The International Center of Clinical Excellence is a psychotherapy institute. The Centio Marital Family Therapy Practice Labs is where they teach negotiating skills. Here it's used in medicine as well, more and more widely, with simulations and the kind of thing that we saw, that research on diagnosis over there. There's been at least one meta-analysis where they've looked at deliberate practice across multiple domains, and it's not perfect. It doesn't always, it doesn't work in every single setting. There are critics of it, but it's definitely a very useful technique for getting better at something. The books, the titles are often disguised in other things. So Talent Code, this is the book, this is Anders Ericsson's book called Peak, and it's the one, unfortunately I haven't finished reading it, but I was using it to get information for this webinar. But you can see all of these things work on the same kind of view. Here, talent is overrated. Very said the genius in all of us. And they all use similar principles around deliberate practice and just become like a very common mainstream idea. So I'm not going to go through my summary because I think we've covered that enough. But I think to end off with, I bring you the Deliberate Practice Challenge. And the Deliberate Practice Challenge is for everyone in the audience to find an area of themselves that they want to grow in. And remember, it's got to be like a very concrete, small area. So you break it down into a unit of development, something that you can repeat. You find someone who's better than you at that, or an expert in that, who can model how to do it, and who can give you feedback on, so while you're doing it for them, you get the feedback and can see what's going on. Then your trainer takes you through it, you get the steps of improvement, you maybe video yourself and give it to the person who's helping you, and you showcase how you're doing, and then you use your improved skills in the real world. So I'm saying, this is something, deliberate practice isn't just an academic idea. It's something that anybody can use in their lives to get better at something that is important to them. And then obviously once you're done, you find the next skill. And there's no shame in plateauing in your life. There's no shame in saying, I don't need to be an expert in everything. Or I'm tired of growing. I'm happy the way I am. I'm glad I'm average. That's all I ever want to be. And that would be fine too. But, if you want to get good at something, this is a methodology that I think can be used in the real world. So that brings me to the end of our webinar. And I'd be happy, as I say, I'm not an expert, but I'd be happy to hear your thoughts on it in the last kind of few minutes, or any questions that you have, which I can definitely try and answer. But you're welcome to use, yeah.
So Hilton, in the room today actually is Joe. Joe is one of our coaches and just does the course leader as coach. And Joe, I don't know if you can unmute people, David, but Joe mentioned that the part that the people loved the most about the course was just the actual deliberate practice, which is the practicing of the leaders with the coaching framework and skills. So I think it's very interesting, and that was the piece that they really enjoyed. I have a question around chunking. What would that look like with, say, you wanted to learn a discrete skill? What would chunking then be?
So there has to be some kind of distillation of development. So, you know, like you as a leader, Colleen, would kind of think, you know, what are the areas where I need to improve as a leader? And you would identify something. Maybe, you know, you're too empathic, and maybe you need to be more hardcore in the way that you lead your teams, or, you know, I don't know, you would know better than me, but then you would take that and say, well, you know, what are the little, you know, what are the micro entities of that in the conversation? Where do I become, you know, too involved and too focused on the person and not on the task? And you would practice that with someone. You would set up, so it's not, I mean, it's a kind of a role play, but you would set it up, except the person would be saying to you, this is how you need to get better and better at this. And you would practice that until you had nailed it, until it was automatic, because the kind of brain automaticity of it is absolutely crucial, just like we saw with Mondo Duplantis and just like we saw with Yuja Wang and the Polgasis and everyone. It's got to become internalized as a thing. So yeah, it takes some effort to do it.
Great. Any other questions for Hilton? I think the mics are still muted, David. Maybe you can unmute them.
I've allowed Joe. Should be unmuted.
Okay, but maybe everyone can unmute, because anyone can ask a question.
Yeah, I'm happy for there to be total chaos.
Thanks, Joe. I see your post. We are converted around deliberate practice and the use and coaching.
So who was that from?
Joe.
Okay. And I'm interested to hear from, you know, leaders in the room, whether they see a avenue of development using, you know, so, you know, if you think of yourself as a leader, does it resonate with that?
I think people are still muted, but I think it does connect also to the feedback piece, because what we do find is the more senior you get, the less feedback you get. So I really liked what you said about, you know, age doesn't necessarily mean you're getting better. If you're not sort of deliberately getting feedback about how you're coming across, people are nervous to give feedback as well.
Well, we know from a very common item in our 360s is ask for feedback on how he or she could do better. And it's often the lowest rated item by everybody. So, you know, like, because most leaders don't go to, I mean, some do, but most leaders don't go to their team and say, you know, help me be a better leader. I really want to, you know, let's identify. Yeah, it doesn't happen often, and it should.
And I think you also have to have an element of courage to do this, because there is a sense that you should know what you're doing. So if you're reaching out to say, please help me do better, for some people that will be, depending on the culture, that may seem to be career limiting for some people. Yes, I've got his praise.
Colleen, I've unmuted.
Hi there.
Hi. Thanks, David.
Hi.
Go ahead.
My name is High Praise.
Thank
you, Colleen. I've got a question for Hilton. I think, Colleen, you did ask about what about when a person is deliberately learning something that he doesn't like? And you said you were going to talk about
Keegan,
it. You can
yes,
maybe
Hilton.
Yes.
Come back to that question of Keegan's, Hilton.
Okay, so the question was, if you're forced to learn something you don't like, is deliberate practice the right methodology? Is that? I don't know if
Keegan.
Sorry. So I was asking if I practice something every day, right? But I really don't love what I do. Will I still become exceptional?
I think so. Yeah. So Keegan, I think you'll become exceptional if you follow the methods of deliberate practice. If you're having the feedback and you're pushing it at the boundary of where you're effective and taking it into an area where you're less comfortable. So I think you'll still learn it. I don't know if I would see the point of doing something that you're not motivated to do. And by the way, when the Polgar sisters are interviewed today, I mean, Judith is now a chess commentator. They're very positive about their upbringing. They're not, I mean, I know that it can be kind of those helicopter parents who just drive their children to be expert performers, and like everyone hates it and they all burn out when they're 20. But with Laszlo, Polgar wasn't like that. So yeah, Keegan, I do think it's better if you're motivated, But the issue is, and Anders Ericsson makes this point, is that it's hard work. That like getting good at something requires you to suffer. It requires you to be out of, if you're feeling comfortable learning it, you're probably not pushing the boundary hard enough. So it must take you into an area where something new is happening. And it is hard work, yeah.
And maybe you think you don't like it just because you lack confidence in it. Tanya has a question.
It was more just a comment, sorry, towards what Keegan just asked. I do know a girl who was number 2 under 18 squash. So obviously trains from, I think, the age of 8 every single day. It was something that she didn't particularly love doing, but her dad, she did it to please her dad, who was really excited about her becoming the best at it. So she trained every single day for years and years and years, and she did get exceptionally good at it, but it got to a point where her interest was completely lost. So she went to uni and then just stopped playing. So I think there's that kind of like, you can push yourself to get exceptional, but to stay there is difficult if you don't, if there isn't an interest there to stay in that space.
I think that's insightful, Tanya. I mean, I think as a psychologist, I would say, work on the things that are meaningful for you, where you're motivated to do well, because it's needed over there to actually excel. By the way, just on the kind of talent thing, I know that, there was a lot we were saying about like talent is much less important. Anders Ericsson would say totally not important, but there is the view that, physiologically you can have a benefit. In other words, if you take someone who is a very short person, they're never going to be a world-class basketball player. Like Michael Phelps, whatever, he had bigger hands, like a world-class swimmer. There are physiological advantages that you can have that absolutely do make a difference. But Anders Ericsson say those are the only things that, are like talent, in the talent direction. Everything else is hard work. And even those people practice like mad. Yeah.
So we have 2 minutes left, and I was wondering if Jenny could switch on her camera. Just to introduce Jenny, she'll be our next guest for our next webinar on creative problem solving. It's going to be really exciting, David. I don't have the date in my head right now, but we're looking forward to sharing Jenny's very unique approach to problem solving. I don't know if Jenny can switch on her camera. There we go.
Hi, everybody. This has been fascinating. And in fact, a lot of what you've been saying, Hilton, speaks to my philosophy around creative problem solving. I have quoted Ericsson in my thesis, and I am definitely a big proponent of deliberate practice. This has been it has been fascinating for me as well. And I look forward to our next webinar. Thanks, Colleen.
Great. Thanks for popping in.
Thanks, Jenny. If I knew you were in the audience, I would have been more intimidated. So
I was intimidated. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. So any other questions? And then we'll close. Candace, go for it, Candace.
Hi, let me just put my camera on. In terms of available resources, how does that impact someone from being able to practice? So let's say, for example, you're driven, you want to play tennis, but you don't have the means to have a coach. Would that obviously have an impact, having the available resources to actually practice?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the methodology, do you have to go pay for it and buy a coach? You could just find someone who's a bit better than you and, who can take you at least to the boundary of where you're effective and take you a little bit past that. So, it could be a social thing with a friend that could also do it. Yeah, but, you are wanting to learn from people who are definitely more advanced than you. That's part of the principle here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or YouTube.
True.
Okay. Yeah.
Thanks, Candace. Good. Is anyone else's hand up? Or was that still Candace? Good. I think that's it.
Yeah, time's up.
Oh, Matapelo. Quickly, is it Matapelo?
It is
Hi,
Matapelo,
hi
yes. Hi,
Matapelo.
Colleen.
How
I'm
are
gonna be
you?
quick. Good in
Good.
you.
Go for
Hey,
it.
Hilton, just a
Hi.
clarity question. On the when you reflected the analysis of when a generalist was plateauing, am I correct in saying that the generalist was because they were not applying the principles of deliberate practice? Are you then insinuating that the deliberate practice model makes you more specialist in nature?
I mean, I think the message over there that I think should be relayed is that in order to improve, you have to actively work at a skill of improving. That, generally, if you've learned something and you're not actively pushing the boundaries of it, you're going to plateau and even degrade. So yeah, you have to do the work, and it's been shown across just like multiple domains that this is true, that people in their heads, if you ask them, they would say I'm much better than I was 10 years ago, but the evidence would be actually that you're slipping. The people who learn them, like if you take a student in psychology now who's just spent 8 years over there, they're going to have a conversation. I mean, they've learned all the latest stuff. They'll be much more knowledgeable than I have. My domains have narrowed completely, and they'll have much better knowledge than me. So, does the amount that you're exposing yourself to the latest stuff is definitely crucial, and that's why lifelong learning is an absolute prerogative. It's just crucial. Yeah.
Thanks.
Cool.
Thanks, Matapelo. Good question. I really like that.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Hilton. Thanks for the
Hilton.
great session. We'll send the
See you next
recording
year.
to anyone who wants it. Thank you. Thanks, David.
Thanks, everybody. Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye.